Question 1. Topic: Parental alienation and high conflict custody cases. During a comprehensive review of a process that needs improvement, a judge examines a case where one parent is accused of alienating the child from the other parent. The child refuses to visit the non-custodial parent, citing fear and discomfort. Though no evidence of abuse exists, the custodial parent argues that forcing visitation is against the child's wishes. How should the court handle the case? A. The court should automatically terminate the non-custodial parent's visitation rights to align with the child's wishes. B. The court should investigate the claims, order reunification therapy, and consider modifying custody if parental alienation is found. C. The court should immediately grant sole custody to the non-custodial parent to correct the alienation. D. The court should require the child to testify in court and base the decision solely on the child's testimony. Answer: B. The court should investigate the claims, order reunification therapy, and consider modifying custody if parental alienation is found. Explanation: Parental alienation occurs when one parent intentionally manipulates the child to reject the other parent without justifiable reasons. Courts take such allegations seriously as they can harm the child's psychological well-being and the parent-child relationship. Option is incorrect because terminating visitation solely based on the child's preference ignores the possibility of alienation and denies the child a relationship with both parents. Courts prioritize the best interest of the child, not just their express wishes. Option B is correct because courts often order psychological evaluations, reunification therapy, and, in severe cases, a change in custody if the custodial parent is found to be engaging in alienation. Under Troxel v. Granville, courts must balance parental rights with the child's welfare. Option C is incorrect because an immediate change in custody without due process and evidence could further disrupt the child's stability. Courts avoid drastic changes without justification. Option D is incorrect because relying solely on a child's testimony can be problematic as children may be influenced or pressured. Courts typically consider expert evaluations, parental conduct, and past custody agreements. Question 2. Topic: Property division in divorce. While analyzing the root causes of sequential problems in divorce settlements, a dispute arises over the classification of a business started by one spouse before marriage but significantly expanded during the marriage using joint funds. How should the court classify and divide the business assets? A. The entire business remains separate property since it was established before the marriage. B. The entire business is marital property and subject to equitable division. C. The portion of the business that increased in value during the marriage due to joint efforts or marital funds is marital property. D. The spouse who started the business before marriage retains full ownership, but the other spouse may be entitled to a reimbursement for contributions. Answer: C. The portion of the business that increased in value during the marriage due to joint efforts or marital funds is marital property. Explanation: The classification of the business in divorce depends on whether it is considered separate or marital property. Courts distinguish between initial ownership and active appreciation of an asset during marriage. Option is incorrect because while the business was started before marriage, its value likely increased due to marital contributions, making a portion subject to division. Equitable distribution states recognize that joint efforts contribute to asset growth. Option B is incorrect because not all business assets are necessarily marital property. Courts assess whether active efforts by both spouses contributed to growth. Option C is correct because the increase in value of a premarital business due to marital funds, labor, or efforts is considered marital property, as established in cases like O'Brien v. O'Brien. The court may apply forensic accounting to assess how much of the growth is marital. Option D is partially correct but incomplete, as reimbursement may be one remedy, but the more common approach is to treat the increased value as marital property for division purposes. Question 3. Topic: Domestic violence and protective orders. In a situation where formal requirements conflict with urgent safety concerns, a survivor of domestic violence seeks an emergency protective order against their spouse but does not have immediate physical evidence of abuse. The court must decide whether to grant the order. What is the most appropriate course of action? A. The court should deny the request due to lack of immediate physical evidence and require a full hearing. B. The court should issue a temporary protective order based on the survivor's testimony and assess further evidence later. C. The court should refer the survivor to law enforcement and require a criminal charge before granting the order. D. The court should require the abuser's consent before issuing any protective order. Answer: B. The court should issue a temporary protective order based on the survivor's testimony and assess further evidence later. Explanation. Protective orders are designed to provide immediate relief to survivors of domestic violence, often before a full hearing takes place. Courts recognize the urgency of these situations under laws such as the Violence Against Women Act. VAWA. Option is incorrect because requiring immediate physical evidence overlooks the reality that many abuse cases lack visible injuries, and courts often rely on testimony, affidavits, and prior incidents. Option B is correct because courts typically grant ex parte temporary protective orders when the survivor demonstrates reasonable fear of harm. Most states allow such orders based on sworn statements with a full hearing scheduled within days. Option C is incorrect because requiring a criminal charge before granting protection would leave victims vulnerable. Civil protective orders are separate from criminal proceedings. Option D is incorrect because abusers do not have to consent for courts to issue protective orders. The primary concern is the survivor's safety. Question 4. During a major transformation where existing methods of determining child custody are being reevaluated, a state legislature is considering shifting from a best interest of the child standard to a more rigid presumption of joint custody. Critics argue that such a change may overlook cases involving domestic violence or high conflict parenting. If the law is changed to make joint custody the default, what legal challenges rise, and how would courts balance this presumption with the safety and well-being of the child? A. Courts would be bound by the presumption and unable to consider factors such as domestic violence or parental fitness. B. Parents opposing joint custody would have to present clear and convincing evidence that sole custody is necessary for the child's welfare. C. The presumption would automatically override previous custody agreements unless both parents agree to an alternative arrangement. D. The new law would eliminate the need for judicial discretion, ensuring uniform outcomes across custody cases. Answer. B. Parents opposing joint custody would have to present clear and convincing evidence that sole custody is necessary for the child's welfare. Explanation. The best interest of the child. The standard currently used in most states allows judges to evaluate custody based on a variety of factors, including parental stability, domestic violence, and the child's needs. A shift to a presumption of joint custody could raise legal concerns, particularly cases where one parent is unfit or where there is a history of domestic violence. Courts would likely require parents contesting joint custody to provide clear and convincing evidence that an alternative arrangement better serves the child. This aligns with due process principles and ensures that custody decisions remain focused on the child's welfare. Option A is incorrect because courts would still have discretion in exceptional cases. Option C is incorrect because prior custody agreements remain enforceable unless legally modified. Option D is incorrect because removing judicial discretion could lead to unjust outcomes in complex cases. Question 5. In a multi-location scenario where consistency requirements in family law must be maintained, an unmarried couple living in different states is disputing parental rights over their child. The father, who resides in a state recognizing putative father rights, seeks custody, while the mother, in another state with stricter parental rights laws, argues that he has no standing. Given the differences in state laws, which legal principle will likely determine the appropriate jurisdiction and the father's parental rights? A. The mother's state law will prevail because she gave birth to the child, establishing automatic custody. B. The Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction and Enforcement Act (UCJIA) will dictate which state has jurisdiction based on the child's primary residence. C. Federal law requires both states to equally recognize the father's claim to parental rights regardless of local laws. D. The state with the more restrictive parental rights laws will precedence to ensure uniformity in custody determinations. Answer. B. The Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction and Enforcement Act (UCJIA) will dictate which state has jurisdiction based on the child's primary residence. Explanation. The Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction and Enforcement Act (UCJIA) establishes clear jurisdictional rules for interstate custody disputes. Under the UCJIA, the state where the child has lived for the past 6 months is typically the one with jurisdiction over the custody dispute. This prevents forum shopping, where one parent moves to a different state to gain legal advantage. Option A is incorrect because mother's custody is not automatically superior under interstate law. Option C is incorrect because parental rights are determined by state law, not federal law. Option D is incorrect because the UCJIA prioritizes the child's home state, not the state with the stricter laws. Question 6. While analyzing the root causes of sequential problems in high-conflict custody cases, courts often consider allegations of parental alienation. If a parent claims that the other is deliberately turning the child against them, what legal and psychological factors must the court evaluate before modifying custody arrangements? A. The court must require the child to testify to confirm whether they genuinely dislike the alienated parent. B. A finding of parental alienation must be supported by expert testimony and must show a significant impact on the child's well-being. C. The alienated parent must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the other parent engaged in alienation. D. If parental alienation is suspected, the court will immediately transfer full custody to the alienated parent. Answer. B. A finding of parental alienation must be supported by expert testimony and must show a significant impact on the child's well-being. Explanation. Parental alienation occurs when one parent manipulates the child to reject the other parent, often in high-conflict custody disputes. Courts do not rely solely on a child's statements. Option A is incorrect because children may be influenced or pressured. Instead, expert evaluate psychological assessments and behavioral patterns must support a claim of alienation. The burden of proof is typically a preponderance of the evidence, not beyond a reasonable doubt. Option C is incorrect. Courts do not automatically transfer custody. Option D is incorrect. Instead, they may modify custody arrangements, require counseling, or order reunification therapy if alienation is found. Question 7. During the introduction of new methods for enforcing spousal support, a state implements a policy allowing courts to seize assets from individuals who fail to comply with alimony orders. The law is challenged as violating due process rights. What legal principles will the court likely consider in determining whether the enforcement mechanism is constitutional? A. The court will assess whether the individual had notice and an opportunity to be heard before their assets were seized. B. The law is unconstitutional because spousal support enforcement cannot include asset seizure. C. Courts cannot enforce spousal support if the paying spouse claims financial hardship. D. Asset seizure is automatically valid since alimony orders are legally binding. Answer A. The court will assess whether the individual had notice and an opportunity to be heard before their assets were seized. Explanation. The Due Process Clause of the 5th and 14th Amendments requires that individuals receive notice and an opportunity to be heard before their property is taken by the government. If a state seizes assets without allowing the individual to contest the action in court, it would likely violate due process. Option B is incorrect because asset seizure is a common enforcement tool in spousal support cases. Option C is incorrect because financial hardship does not automatically exempt a person from paying alimony. Courts evaluate modification requests separately. Option D is incorrect because even legally binding orders must comply with due process. Question 8. In a situation where formal requirements conflict with practical realities, a same-sex couple who conceived a child through surrogacy faces legal challenges when one parent is not biologically related to the child. What legal principles determine parental rights in such cases? A. Only the biological parent has legal rights unless the non-biological parent adopts the child. B. Courts recognize parental rights based on intent to parent, legal agreements, and state laws on surrogacy. C. The non-biological parent must establish paternity through DNA testing before obtaining custody rights. D. If the couple separates, only the biological parent retains custody regardless of prior agreements. Answer. B. Courts recognize parental rights based on intent to parent, legal agreements, and state laws on surrogacy. Explanation. In modern family law, courts recognize parental intent and legal agreements, particularly in surrogacy cases. Many states grant parental rights to non-biological parents based on gestational agreements, second parent adoptions, or pre-birth orders. Option A is incorrect because legal agreements can establish non-biological parental rights. Option C is incorrect because DNA testing is not required for non-biological parental recognition. Option D is incorrect because courts evaluate custody based on the child's best interests, not just biology. Question 9. While managing a hybrid approach where timing issues impact property division in divorce cases, a couple disagrees on whether an investment acquired before the marriage but significantly increased in value during the marriage should be considered marital property. How would courts typically classify and divide such an asset? A. The entire investment remains separate property because it was acquired before marriage. B. The investment is considered marital property if marital funds or efforts contributed to its appreciation. C. The court will divide the investment 50-50 regardless of contributions. D. The spouse who acquired the asset keeps it and the other spouse has no claim. Answer. B. The investment is considered marital property if marital funds or efforts contributed to its appreciation. Explanation. Under equitable distribution principles, property acquired before marriage is separate property, but if marital funds or efforts contributed to its increase in value, the appreciation may be classified as marital property. Courts analyze active versus passive appreciation. If the increase was due to one spouse's work, marital investment is subject to division. Option A is incorrect because appreciation may be marital. Option C is incorrect because division is based on fairness, not an automatic 50-50 split. Option D is incorrect because spouses can have claims to appreciation. Question 10. During a major transformation where existing methods of determining property division in divorce cases are being reevaluated, a state legislature is considering adopting a community property system instead of an equitable distribution model. How would this shift impact asset division and what legal challenges might arise? A. All assets acquired during the marriage would automatically be split 50-50 regardless of individual contributions. B. Courts would still retain discretion to divide property based on fairness rather than a fixed percentage. C. The new system would primarily affect high asset divorces, while lower asset cases would remain under equitable distribution. D. Community property laws would override all existing prenuptial agreements. Answer. A. All assets acquired during the marriage would automatically be split 50-50 regardless of individual contributions. Explanation. A community property system presumes that all marital assets are jointly owned and must be split equally 50-50 upon divorce, regardless of individual financial contributions. In contrast, equitable distribution allows courts to divide property based on fairness, which may not all. An equal split. Option B is incorrect because community property laws remove judicial discretion in most cases. Option C is incorrect because all divorces, regardless of wealth level, would follow the new system. Option D is incorrect because prenuptial agreements are still legally enforceable in most cases. Question 11. In a multi-location scenario where consistency requirements in estate planning must be maintained, an individual with significant assets in multiple state drafts a will under the laws of one state. However, after their passing, heirs in another state challenge the validity of the will. What legal principles determine which state's law will govern the distribution of the estate? A. The state where the deceased lived at the time of death will generally have jurisdiction over the estate. B. The state where the will was originally drafted will always control the estate's distribution. C. Heirs can choose the state with the most favorable inheritance laws to govern the estate. D. Federal inheritance laws supersede state laws in determining estate distribution. Answer A. The state where the deceased lived at the time of death will generally have jurisdiction over the estate. Explanation. In most cases, the state where the deceased was domiciled at the time of death will have jurisdiction over probate matters. Option B is incorrect because wills must be interpreted under the laws of the state of domicile at death, not where they were written. Option C is incorrect because heirs cannot choose to stay arbitrary. Option D is incorrect because inheritance laws are determined at the state level, not federal. Question 12. While analyzing the root causes of sequential problems in real estate transactions, courts often face disputes involving ambiguous property deeds. If two parties claim ownership over a piece of land due to conflicting deed records, what legal principles guide the resolution of the dispute? A. The first party to file a lawsuit will have priority in ownership. B. The principle of first in time, first in right generally applies, favoring the party with the earlier recorded deed. C. Ownership will be determined based on which party has occupied the land for the longest period. D. If the deeds conflict, both parties must split the land equally. Answer B. The principle of first in time, first in right generally applies, favoring the party with the earlier recorded deed. Explanation. The first in time, first in right principle means that the first party to properly record their deed generally holds superior title. Option A is incorrect because filing a lawsuit does not establish ownership. Option C is incorrect because possession alone does not override a valid recorded deed. Option D is incorrect because courts do not automatically split land when disputes arise. Question 13. During the introduction of new methods for enforcing business contracts, a company argues that it should not be bound by an agreement it entered into due to economic hardship. What key legal principle determines whether the contract remains enforceable? A. Contracts are only enforceable if both parties continue to benefit equally. B. Economic hardship alone is not a valid defense for failing to uphold a contract. C. A contract becomes void if fulfilling it becomes financially burdensome. D. The company can modify the contract terms unilaterally due to unforeseen financial losses. Answer B. Economic hardship alone is not a valid defense for failing to uphold a contract. Explanation. A party cannot escape contractual obligations solely due to financial hardship. Courts enforce contracts unless fraud, coercion, illegality, or impossibility applies. Option A is incorrect because contracts do not require equal benefit to be enforceable. Option C is incorrect because a contract is not void simply because it becomes expensive. Option D is incorrect because contracts require mutual agreement to be modified. Question 14. In a situation where formal requirements conflict with practical realities, a tenant signs a lease but later claims they were not aware of certain clauses limiting their rights. What factors will a court consider in determining whether the lease is enforceable? A. Whether the tenant actually read the lease before signing. B. If the lease terms were presented clearly and in compliance with state landlord-tenant laws. C. Whether the tenant regrets signing the lease after learning of its terms. D. If the landlord can prove the tenant verbally agreed to all terms. Answer B. If the lease terms were presented clearly and in compliance with state landlord-tenant laws. Explanation. Courts enforce contracts, including leases, based on their written terms as long as they comply with state laws and disclosure requirements. Option A is incorrect because not reading a contract does not invalidate it. Option C is incorrect because regret is not a valid legal defense. Option D is incorrect because verbal agreements generally do not override written contracts. Question 15. While managing a hybrid approach where timing issues impact business transactions, a seller and buyer enter into a contract specifying delivery deadlines. The buyer later demands earlier delivery, but the seller refuses. What determines whether the seller must comply? A. The seller must comply if the buyer's needs change unexpectedly. B. The original contract terms control unless both parties agree to a modification. C. The buyer's demand automatically supersedes the original contract. D. The seller can refuse delivery entirely since the contract has been modified. Answer B. The original contract terms control unless both parties agree to a modification. Explanation. Contracts cannot be unilaterally changed. Both parties must agree to modification. Option A is incorrect because buyer's changed needs do not force seller to comply. Option C is incorrect because contractual obligations remain as originally agreed. Option D is incorrect because seller cannot refuse to deliver entirely unless there is breach. Question 16. During a major transformation where new environmental regulations impact commercial leases, a tenant claims they should be exempt from compliance costs. What factors determine whether the tenant is responsible? A. Whether the lease explicitly states who bears the cost of regulatory compliance. B. Environmental laws automatically exempt tenants from compliance expenses. C. The landlord must always cover compliance costs. D. The tenant can unilaterally modify the lease terms to avoid responsibility. Answer A. Whether the lease explicitly states who bears the cost of regulatory compliance. Explanation. Lease agreements determine who pays for regulatory compliance. Courts will look at lease language in state law. Option B is incorrect because environmental laws do not exempt tenants from costs. Option C is incorrect because landlords are not always responsible. Option D is incorrect because tenants cannot modify contracts unilaterally. Question 17. In a multi-location scenario where consistency requirements in labor law must be maintained, an employer claims that federal regulations override state wage laws. Which legal principle applies? A. Federal law only preempts state law if it sets a higher wage standard. B. State laws can impose higher wage requirements than federal law. C. Employers can choose between state and federal wage laws. D. The employer must comply with the lower wage requirement. Answer B. State laws can impose higher wage requirements than federal law. Explanation. Federal minimum wage laws set a baseline, but states can require higher wages. employers must comply with the higher standard. Option A is incorrect because preemption only applies when federal law is more protective. Option C is incorrect because employers must follow the stricter law. Option D is incorrect because the lower wage does not override state law. Question 18. During a major transformation where traditional employment structures are being replaced by gig economy models, a company reclassifies full-time employees as independent contractors. What legal considerations determine whether this reclassification is valid? A. The company can reclassify employees as long as they agree to the change in writing. B. Independent contractor status depends on the degree of control the company has over the worker's tasks and schedule. C. Reclassification is valid if the company provides different tax structure for the workers. D. Workers automatically become independent contractors if they work remotely. Answer. B. Independent contractor status depends on the degree of control the company has over the worker's tasks and schedule. Explanation. Courts determine independent contractor status based on the degree of control company has over how, when, and where work is performed. Option A is incorrect because worker agreements alone do not determine legal classification. Option C is incorrect because tax structure changes do not affect employment status. Option D is incorrect because remote work does not automatically classify someone as an independent contractor. Question 19. While analyzing the root causes of sequential problems in intellectual property disputes, a company sues a competitor for trademark infringement, claiming brand confusion. What factors will the court consider in determining whether infringement occurred? A. Whether consumers are likely to be confused by the similarity between the two trademarks. B. The intent of a competitor when designing their brand is the sole determining factor. C. If both companies operate in different industries, no infringement can occur. D. A trademark can only be infringed if the exact name and logo are copied. Answer A. Whether consumers are likely to be confused by the similarity between the two trademarks. Explanation. Courts assess consumer confusion as the primary test for trademark infringement. Option B is incorrect because intent alone does not determine infringement. Option C is incorrect because similar trademarks in related industries can still confuse consumers. Option D is incorrect because trademark infringement does not require exact copying. Question 20. In a multi-location scenario where consistency requirements in consumer protection laws must be maintained, a national retailer faces accusations of deceptive advertising in multiple states. What legal principles determine liability? A. The retailer is only liable in states where customers file formal complaints. B. If the advertising misleads. A reasonable consumer liability may apply across all states where the ad was shown. C. National retailers are exempt from state-level consumer protection laws. D. Deceptive advertising is only illegal if it involves false pricing information. Answer. B. If the advertising misleads. A reasonable consumer liability may apply across all states where the ad was shown. Explanation. Consumer protection laws focus on whether an ad misleads the average consumer. Option A is incorrect because liability does not require formal complaints. Option C is incorrect because state laws apply to national retailers. Option D is incorrect because deception can involve false claims beyond pricing. Question 21. While managing a hybrid approach where technology-driven services challenge traditional regulatory frameworks, a state government seeks to regulate rideshare companies differently from taxi services. What legal challenges could arise? A. Equal protection laws may require that taxis and rideshares be regulated in the same manner. B. Rideshare companies can choose which regulations to follow based on business needs. C. Taxi services automatically have more legal protections than rideshares. D. Rideshare companies are exempt from regulation if they operate primarily through an app. Answer A. Equal protection laws may require that taxis and rideshares be regulated in the same manner. Explanation. Courts may require equal treatment if different rules create unfair advantages. Option B is incorrect because businesses do not choose which laws apply to them. Option C is incorrect because taxi services do not automatically receive greater legal protection. Option D is incorrect because app-based services can still be regulated. Question 22. During the introduction of new methods for determining liability in cybersecurity breaches, a financial institution faces a lawsuit after data breach exposes customer information. What legal standards will determine the institution's liability? A. Whether the company took reasonable steps to secure customer data based on industry standards. B. Company is always liable for damages following data breach. C. Customers must prove intentional wrongdoing by the company to establish liability. D. Cybersecurity breaches only lead to liability if they involve financial fraud. Answer 8. Whether the company took reasonable steps to secure customer data based on industry standards. Explanation. Courts examine whether the company followed industry best practices in securing data. Option B is incorrect because liability is not automatic. Option C is incorrect because negligence, not just intent, can establish liability. Option D is incorrect because data breaches can involve non-financial harms. Question 23. In a situation where formal requirements conflict with practical realities, a real estate developer begins construction on a project before receiving final zoning approvals. What legal consequences could arise? A. The project may be halted, and the developer could face fines or be required to demolish structures. B. Zoning violations only result in penalties if nearby residents file complaints. C. Developers could continue construction as long as they intend to comply with zoning laws later. D. Local governments cannot enforce zoning laws once construction has begun. Answer A. The project may be halted, and the developer could face fines or be required to demolish structures. Explanation. Building without zoning approval can lead to legal penalties, fines, or even demolition orders. Option B is incorrect because zoning laws are enforced regardless of complaints. Option C is incorrect because intent does not override legal requirements. Option D is incorrect because local governments actively enforce zoning regulations. Question 24. While analyzing the root causes of sequential problems in environmental regulation enforcement, a company is found dumping pollutants into a river without proper permits. What penalties could it face? A. Civil fines, potential criminal charges, and mandatory cleanup efforts. B. The company can only be fined if local residents file lawsuits. C. Environmental violations only lead to penalties if they cause visible harm. D. Companies are automatically exempt from liability if they claim ignorance of the law. Answer A. Civil fines, potential criminal charges, and mandatory cleanup efforts. Explanation. Environmental violations can result in civil penalties, criminal liability, and cleanup mandates. Option B is incorrect because regulators enforce laws even without lawsuits. Option C is incorrect because harm does not need to be visible. Option D is incorrect because ignorance of the law is not a defense. Question 25. During a major transformation where artificial intelligence (AI) influences hiring decisions, an employer implements an automated system to screen job applicants. What legal risks should the employer consider? A. AI hiring systems must comply with anti-discrimination laws and avoid biased outcomes. B. Employers can use AI without legal concerns as long as it speeds up hiring. C. AI-generated hiring decisions are exempt from legal scrutiny. D. Job applicants cannot challenge AI hiring decisions in court. Answer A. AI hiring systems must comply with anti-discrimination laws and avoid biased outcomes. Explanation. AI hiring must comply with anti-discrimination laws. Option B is incorrect because efficiency does not override legal compliance. Option C is incorrect because AI decisions are still subject to legal review. Option D is incorrect because applicants can challenge biased hiring practices. Question 26. In a multi-location scenario where consistency requirements in healthcare data privacy laws must be maintained, a hospital network operating in multiple states faces compliance challenges under differing state regulations. What legal framework applies? A. The strictest state privacy law generally governs data handling across locations. B. Hospitals can choose the least restrictive state law to follow. C. Federal laws override all state healthcare privacy regulations. D. State laws do not apply to hospitals using digital health records. Answer A. The strictest state privacy law generally governs data handling across locations. Explanation. Hospitals must comply with the most restrictive privacy law. Option B is incorrect because hospitals cannot pick the least restrictive law. Option C is incorrect because state laws can supplement federal privacy rules. Option D is incorrect because digital records do not exempt hospitals from state laws. Question 27. During a major transformation where workplace safety regulations are updated to address emerging hazards, a manufacturing company introduces automated machinery that increases productivity but poses new risks to workers. What legal obligations must the company fulfill to ensure compliance? A. Conduct regular safety training, implement protective measures, and comply with OSHA standards. B. The company is only responsible for safety if an employee formally complains about hazardous conditions. C. Workplace safety laws do not apply if employees voluntarily accept the risks. D. If injuries occur, the company can avoid liability by citing the increased productivity benefits of automation. Answer A. Conduct regular safety training, implement protective measures, and comply with OSHA standards. Explanation: employers must follow OSHA regulations, provide safety training, and mitigate risks when introducing new technologies. Option B is incorrect because safety compliance is required regardless of complaints. Option C is incorrect because employees cannot waive legal safety protections. Option D is incorrect because workplace safety laws prioritize employee well-being over productivity gains. Question 28. While analyzing the root causes of sequential problems in financial fraud investigations, a corporate executive is accused of insider trading after selling shares based on non-public information. What legal principles apply? A. Trading on material, non-public information is illegal and may result in criminal and civil penalties. B. Insider trading is only illegal if the company suffers financial losses as a result. C. Executives can freely trade company stock if they do not share confidential information with others. D. Insider trading laws only apply to employees, not corporate executives. Answer A. Trading on material, non-public information is illegal and may result in criminal and civil penalties. Explanation: U.S. securities laws prohibit trading on material, non-public information. Option B is incorrect because illegality is based on unfair advantage, not company losses. Option C is incorrect because insider trading laws apply even if confidential information is not shared. Option D is incorrect because executives are subject to the same laws as employees. Question 29. In a multi-location scenario where consistency requirements in employment discrimination laws must be maintained, a national retailer faces a lawsuit alleging gender-based pay disparities across multiple states. How will courts determine liability? A. Courts will assess whether wage differences are based on legitimate factors like experience and job performance. B. Companies can legally pay different wages as long as employees sign contracts agreeing to lower salaries. C. Pay discrimination laws only apply to businesses with fewer than 50 employees. D. Gender-based pay disparities are only illegal if they occur in a single location rather than across multiple states. Answer A. Courts will assess whether wage differences are based on legitimate factors like experience and job performance. Explanation: courts analyze whether pay disparities result from legitimate business reasons or discrimination. Option B is incorrect because employees cannot waive their rights to fair wages. Option C is incorrect because pay discrimination laws apply to large and small businesses. Option D is incorrect because discrimination laws apply regardless of the number of locations affected. Question 30. During the introduction of new methods for regulating cryptocurrency transactions, a financial institution seeks to expand its digital asset services but faces legal uncertainty. What regulatory challenges must it address? A. Compliance with federal anti-money laundering (AML) laws and Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC) guidelines. B. Cryptocurrencies are exempt from all financial regulations since they are decentralized. C. Banks can handle cryptocurrency transactions without legal concerns as long as customers are informed of the risks. D. Digital assets are not subject to fraud or financial crime regulations. Answer A. Compliance with federal anti-money laundering (ML) laws and Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC) guidelines. Explanation: cryptocurrency transactions must comply with ML laws, SEC rules, and financial crime regulations. Option B is incorrect because cryptocurrencies are subject to financial oversight. Option C is incorrect because disclosure of risks does not exempt banks from compliance. Option D is incorrect because fraud and crime laws apply to digital assets.